All right, let's lift the lid on one of the most common, but maybe one of the most misunderstood appliances you've got in your kitchen, the slow cooker. Yeah, we think of it as being pretty simple, right? But what I'm going to show you today is that inside that ceramic pot is a hidden world, a tiny universe governed by its own unique laws of physics.
I mean, seriously, what if that pot roast isn't just cooking? What if it's part of this perfect repeating cycle, a cycle that actually explains everything, from why your carrots are sometimes still crunchy when the meat is falling apart, to why it can make, no joke, the best cheesecake you've ever had?
So, to really understand this little culinary universe, we need a new way of thinking about it. We're going to call it the crock pot Ouroboros.
Now, you've probably seen the Ouroboros before, right? It's that ancient symbol of a snake eating its own tail. It represents a closed loop, a perfect, self-contained cycle. Well, that's the perfect metaphor for what's happening inside your slow cooker. The lid traps steam. That steam cools, turns back into water, and literally rains back down on the food. This cycle, we're calling it the condensation loop, is the single most important secret to unlocking what your slow cooker can really do.
Think about it this way. Grilling, that's an open system. Moisture and energy escape, which is great for concentrating flavors and getting things crispy, but it also dries things out. A slow cooker is the total opposite. It's a closed system. Because nothing escapes, the food stays incredibly moist. But, and this is key, the flavors can actually get diluted. It's a fundamental trade-off you're making.
So, if the slow cooker is its own universe, well, it's got to have its own laws, right? So let's dive into the physics of what makes this whole thing tick.
Okay, the heart of the whole system is that heavy stoneware pot. Now, it's not a great conductor of heat like a metal pan, and you know what? That's its superpower. It acts as a thermal buffer, just soaking up energy slowly, and then surrounding the food in this gentle, even heat. There are no hot spots, no violent temperature spikes. It's just a slow, rising tide of warmth.
And that condensation loop we keep talking about, it has three massive effects. First, you've got mass conservation. Since no water escapes, the amount of liquid in the pot can actually increase as the food releases its own juices. Crazy, right? Second, all that steam creates a thermal blanket, so the top of your roast cooks just as perfectly as the bottom. And third, it's basically a self-basting machine, constantly raining moisture back down on everything.
Now, here's one of the biggest myths we've got to bust. Low and high are not different cooking temperatures. They're not. Both settings are trying to get to the exact same place, a nice, gentle simmer, right around 209 degrees Fahrenheit. The only difference is how fast they get there. Low takes its sweet time, about 7 to 8 hours. High is the express train, getting there in 3 or 4. So you're not choosing a temperature, you're just choosing a timetable. But this little closed-off universe isn't always a perfect utopia. The very laws that make a slow cooker so great also create some classic and kind of frustrating cooking paradoxes. Okay, the first paradox, I'm sure you've been here. A pot roast where the meat is perfectly tender, fall apart amazing, but the carrots are still stubbornly crunchy. Here's why that happens. The tough collagen in meat starts melting into that delicious gelatin at a pretty low temperature, around 160 degrees. But the pectin that holds root vegetables together, it doesn't even think about breaking down until it hits 183 degrees. They're on two totally different thermal timelines, and they end up fighting each other inside the pot. And that brings us to our next big problem. I want you to look at this number, 280 degrees Fahrenheit. Just burn that into your brain for a second.
Why does 280 degrees matter? Well, that's about the minimum temperature you need for the Maillard reaction. That's the beautiful browning process that creates all those deep, savory, complex flavors we love. Here's the thing. A slow cooker, because it's a wet environment, can't physically get hotter than the boiling point of water, which is 212 degrees. It will never reach 280. So it can never truly brown your food. This is the Maillard paradox. You get incredible texture, but the flavor can end up being a little flat, kind of one-dimensional, like boiled meat.
So we're stuck with these paradoxes, right? Well, not exactly. What if we could hack the system? This is where you go from just being a cook to becoming a chef operator, learning to bend the laws of the loop to get what you want. To solve that Maillard paradox, you have to cheat a little. You have to step outside the closed system. You can pre-sear your meat in a screaming hot pan to create all those flavor compounds before it ever goes into the slow cooker. Or you can do it at the end. Once the meat is perfectly tender, you can hit it under the broiler for a few minutes to create that final crust. You're basically bookending the slow cook with these bursts of high heat flavor.
All right, now for a really surprising hack and one of my favorites. You can actually bake in a slow cooker.
Now, it's not dry baking like in an oven. It's what you'd call steam baking. That super moist environment means you'll never get a brown crust, which is usually a bad thing, but for certain desserts, it's absolutely perfect.
So, how do you bake something without it turning into a soggy mess? The solution is ingenious. The tea towel trick. You just lay a clean kitchen towel over the top of the pot and then put the lid on top of that. You are physically interrupting the condensation loop. The towel absorbs all that rising steam, stopping that internal rain from ruining the top of your cake. It is such a brilliant, simple way to change the fundamental physics of the machine.
And this leads us to the slow cooker's secret weapon: cheesecake. In a regular oven, you have to mess around with a water bath to create enough humidity to keep the cheesecake from cracking, but the slow cooker is a perfect water bath. That gentle, moist heat guarantees a dense, creamy, and completely flawlessly crack-free cheesecake every single time. It's amazing.
Okay, so we've learned the laws, we've learned the hacks. Now let's take this Ouroboros concept to its most mind-bending ultimate final form.
I want you to meet the perpetual stew. This is an ancient idea where a single pot of stew is never, ever finished. It just keeps simmering, and every day, new ingredients and leftovers are added to it. Over time, it becomes this living culinary artifact, a liquid library that holds the memory and the flavor of everything that's ever gone into it.
The mechanics are actually pretty simple. You keep a base broth simmering, you add leftovers from dinner, you ladle out what you need for a meal, but you never empty the pot. Over weeks, months, people have kept these going for years. The flavor becomes impossibly deep and complex. Now, the key, of course, is safety. The stew has to always stay above 140 degrees Fahrenheit to keep any nasty bacteria from growing.
You know, when you really think about it, what the slow cooker teaches us is a different way to think about time. It turns time from this thing you're always racing against in the kitchen into the main ingredient. When you eat a meal that's cooked for 8 hours, you are, in a very real sense, consuming that time itself. The Ouroboros bites its tail, and the whole cycle starts over again.
So the next time you set that dial to low and walk away for the day, just take a second to think about that tiny, self-contained universe you've just set in motion. And maybe ask yourself, what other complex things in your life don't need more frantic energy, but just more time? More time in a closed loop, patiently simmering toward a solution.